episode 147 of the 4Ps, and it's been 365 days since I've seen my coworkers in person. It's been one full year since my last day commuting into New York City. An entire trip around the sun since spending 10 hours a day in an office. 52 weeks since trying to figure out how to get the video and audio to work in our conference rooms. Remember conference rooms? Every single person on Earth has celebrated a birthday in some sort of socially distant isolation in the last year. COVID, man. The 4Ps. Professional. Political. Practical. Personal. Been hard not to think about our mortality in that time, and impossible to ignore how the decisions we've made in our own lives have gotten us here. I'm not much of a crier, but a number of different events nearly brought me to tears in just the last week alone. One was reading a newsletter about someone putting his dog to sleep. Another was reading a story about a teenager who was off at college when both her parents died from COVID. Another was just thinking about all the people who have impacted me throughout my career, so many of whom are women, as we were thinking about International Women's Day. Talk about a range of emotions. Oof! So why is this all coming together now? I'm not entirely sure, but let's do some pensive, probing, and productive problem solving, shall we? Something personal. And maybe what I need right now is a good midlife crisis. It's kind of getting to be that time. Been hearing about these things for years, waiting my turn, hoping that if and when it does hit me, that I end up on the other side better with some sense of purpose or passion that I may not have had beforehand. But what is a midlife crisis really? How do you even know when it's happening? Is there some formula for having a meaningful midlife crisis? Are there triggers that I need to trip over? Does it have to start with some sort of catastrophic breakdown? In seeking answers to all these questions, now is the time to be thinking about it. Right? I've reached an age where it's more likely to put me smack dab in the middle of my lifespan. So now seems like as good a time as any. The concept of a midlife crisis is relatively new. Our prehistoric ancestors, whose average lifespan was only like 30 or 40 years, weren't sitting in a cave crying somewhere pondering their immortality at age 18. Now, several millennia later, I think 1960s, a social scientist named Elliot Jacques first gave a name to this notion in an essay called Death and the Midlife Crisis. Now, by the time we reach our 40s now, there are some hard truths to acknowledge. We realize that many of our childhood and adolescent dreams are never going to come true. We realize that the disappointment and boredom that sometimes happen throughout our lives in ebbs and flows are also very real. We realize that we're mortal. It could be the loss of our parents or even friends as they get older. That could be an extreme trigger. But so are random aches and pains that arise seemingly out of the blue because we slept funny. Some decisions we made in our lives turned out to be the right ones. Some, maybe not, right? There are things we haven't achieved, things we may never achieve. And those begin to haunt us if we think too long and hard about it. And for some people, that's a bitter pill to swallow. This could be the nadir of our happiness V, which is a term I just made up. And we start out fairly happy, growing somewhat dissatisfied in middle age, and then hopefully finding contentment in our older years. Now, when I was in high school, I took a philosophy class and found myself equally enamored by Jeremy Bentham and the utilitarians, and John Stuart Mill's obsession with his own happiness, and how that obsession actually made him miserable, which is ironic. Now, John Stuart Mill cared about social reform, but his focus on fixing problems and improving society meant that he neglected other aspects of his own life. We can all fall into this trap, whether it's with our careers or thinking about something bigger. But what truly matters is making time for the things that we enjoy and love. Now, we didn't realize it at the time, but decisions we made throughout our younger years have had massive consequences on where we ultimately end up. I once turned down a unpaid internship with a prestigious sports agency in order to work a paying job and earn money for my senior year of college, just drinking money. I had big ambitions to become a sports agent, and yet I never achieved those now. Every one of these decisions involves a trade-off. And although you may have chosen wisely in the end, it's still natural to wonder about what options you chose or decided against. Sometimes we have regrets that are more significant than any wistfulness about lives not lived. Sometimes there are decisions we sincerely wish we hadn't made, and unfortunate events we wish we could have avoided. Then, I look at my pictures of my amazing wife and our kids and realize that past decisions would undoubtedly have precluded their existence. Who needs a midlife crisis when I have them? As for the death in the midlife crisis and death essay, it's inevitable. Everyone grapples with it at some point. It seemed so far away when we were younger, and it suddenly seems to have inched a few steps closer. But I think I feared death more as a kid than I do now. It would be nice to not die, sure, but why worry about it when we don't possess that superhuman ability any more than any other superpowers that we don't have? I don't worry about not being able to fly. At times like this, I think of the advice that David Stern, the late NBA commissioner, gave me in what was literally our last conversation on my last day before leaving the NBA. And he said, "Love the process, not the goal." And some of you who are former NBA people may remember him saying this to you as well. Some tasks have an end. Life has an end. But for everything we do, there's a process. It's the best part of the lives that we live. So, is this it? Am I in the middle of a mid-video crisis? Whether or not a personal midlife crisis is in the cards for me, I'm not afraid of it. Learning to deal with regret, finding time for the things we enjoy doing, and embracing reality rather than the outlines of imaginative and imagined alternatives is going to propel me forward. But just in case, if anybody has the number for a really good therapist, please feel free to share it with me. Something practical. The vision of the American dream has been rooted in this idea that hard work creates opportunities for each of us to unlock and achieve greatness. But what if greatness is actually overrated? Maybe it's time to accept the idea that mediocrity can be a desirable goal. This understanding and acceptance may actually prevent the onset of any such midlife crisis. Some of us first come to terms with this idea of mediocrity at a young age, right? It could be the realization that we'll never be great at drawing something, or math, or basketball, or making friends, or handwriting. Ideally, those realizations of limitations help us to focus and then find our strengths and make better decisions. As we grow older, acceptance of limitations becomes a more frequent everyday occurrence. We accept that rejection and failure and misaligned expectations are part of life, that perfection is a myth. We've been led to believe that our lives should be extraordinary. We're often told that it's important to have high self-esteem. Not only that, those of us who experience self-doubt should be meant to feel like there's something wrong with us. But there's good reason to be grateful for only moderate levels of self-esteem. We may idolize confidence, but there's nothing wrong with a little bit of anxiety. And there's a great deal to be said for the appreciation of what you have and what you're able to control. We've been led to believe that our friendships should be extraordinary. But trying to maintain too many close friendships doesn't make us happy at all. Instead, it creates some psychological pressure known as role strain. Right? We're trying to fit in and adapt into how people perceive us. Evolutionary psychologists believe that human beings are only really capable of having one or two best friends and no more than 5 close friends. The key to friendship is quality, not quantity. Even with love, there's no perfection. So the next time you compare your rather ordinary relationship to other people's Instagram romances, ask yourself why that couple needs to flaunt its love. We've been led to believe that wealth can make us extraordinary. But maybe striving for comfort and security is a better goal than being rich and famous. In fact, the higher your wages, the more likely you are to get divorced and experience all sorts of other stress. Getting everyone above the poverty line has to be a social goal, but the ceiling for comfort and contentment is actually, on average, at about an income of only $75,000 per year. Any more than that, then the psychological difference actually becomes negligible and maybe even more detrimental. We've been told and led to believe that high intelligence is synonymous with being extraordinary. Some of the most financially successful and happiest and most well-liked people I know probably fall in the middle of the intelligence bell curve. There's a famous intelligence lifetime study that showed that many children with the highest IQs end up in ordinary jobs and with average incomes. Their intelligence didn't protect them from unpleasant life events and rates of divorce or addiction and suicide. It was no different than that of the general American population. That's where the study was done. And too many people believe later in life that they hadn't lived up to what was expected of them. This just goes to show that being the smartest person in the room might not be so great after all. Good lesson. We've also been led to believe that physical attributes and appearance can make us extraordinary. But being objectively good-looking doesn't make you happy. While our late teens and 20s are the years when we tend to be at our slimmest and freshest, an average 60-year-old woman is more satisfied with her body than most 18-year-olds. Many highly attractive people report that they struggle to be taken seriously in the workplace, and that their colleagues expect them to be less intelligent simply because they're good-looking. While beauty is certainly in the eye of the beholder, experts believe that most people underestimate their own attractiveness by about 20%. Research has also found that your partner finds you more attractive than an average stranger would. So even if society thinks you're just ordinary looking, your significant other probably thinks you look extraordinary. None of those external things you think will make your life better actually will. So let's not spend our lives wishing for what we can't have. We can't all be special, but we can thrive, certainly. Right? Being extraordinary is overrated. So let's celebrate our ordinariness and embrace mediocrity. Normalizing ordinary may actually be a path to improving social equity and equality. I know that sounds ambitious. Last week in a Clubhouse chat that I dropped in on, an influential member of my industry said that there's inequity in every organizational and social construct. And at the full risk of sounding too white-splaining, upper-middle-class-splaining, mansplaining, I'm fully aware that what I'm about to say comes from a place of privilege. Yet, as a white male with a position of some influence, you're watching this, or listening to this, I don't want to avoid difficult topics like inequity, inequality, and poverty. Being poor and feeling poor are different things. The first is a legitimate crisis rooted as much in race and class as anything else. But the second, feeling poor, is less about material circumstances than how people are compared to others. Research shows that only about 20% of people who report feeling poor actually meet the definition of poverty. The other 80% see themselves as inequitably disadvantaged, even when their income places them squarely in what society defines as middle class. Even people who aren't objectively poor but perceive financial inequity based on social constructs can suffer negative consequences when feeling poor relative to others. They're more likely to experience depression, anxiety, chronic pain, more likely to have health issues, weight, diabetes, heart problems, and more likely to believe in conspiracy theories. They're more likely to underperform at work and make bad life decisions. Inequity is real. The world's 85 richest people have as much wealth as the poorest 3.5 billion people. Regardless of income, inequality of opportunity and access yields different outcomes. Our politics are polarized, society is divided, families are permanently fractured. Young black men and women worry about their lives. It's an existential crisis when walking down the street. At a macro level, this comes down to power and control in terms of that division. People who see themselves as advantaged are determined to not let the disadvantaged level the competitive playing field. The best way to exclude them from decision making is disenfranchisement. People who see themselves as disadvantaged, however, by contrast, want everyone to have an equal say, an equal vote, even those who disagree with them. Feeling superior in status, in other words, magnifies people's contempt for those who disagree with them. This divide perpetuates a negative feedback loop, where the societies with high inequality have worse health outcomes than those with more equal distribution of wealth, thus putting more obstacles in the path of achieving equality. Race and ethnicity play a massive factor here, especially in the United States, but it is a global epidemic. A middle-class person living in high inequality Singapore has statistically worse health outcomes than a middle-class person living in low inequality Finland. The more equal a society, the healthier its inhabitants. The average person will experience inequality most frequently at work, as the wages of ordinary workers stagnate and executive pay rates shoot into the stratosphere. The vast majority of workers will experience high levels of stress and fail to perform at their full capacity. But this wouldn't be a 4Ps topic if all hope was lost. We need to continue organizing and voting and putting pressure on lawmakers to create new redistributive policies that not only raise the bottom rungs of the ladder, but also, crucially, lower the top ones. In the short term, I would love to share more of my reach in this platform with those who are living with these challenges and working to create solutions every day. Collectively, we can also highlight and enact more control over the way we compare ourselves to others. That's a privilege thing. Instead of focusing on what you don't have, for example, focus on what you do have. No time like the present to reevaluate what you really value in life. Consciously thinking about what really matters to us is an antidote to the unconscious default of looking to others to figure out how much and what we value ourselves. And something professional. Thinking about what matters to us also applies in our careers. Changes in company, title, or role often trigger these thoughts. As a result of the recent acquisition of Revelation by Jellyfish, I'm joining a global company and meeting so many new people. I've been learning a lot about updates in media technology, and the Google marketing platform. We're also still talking about insights-driven creativity. After hours, I find myself deep diving and learning more about the ad tech and analytics features of these platforms, while at the same time also evaluating dozens of entries as a judge in this year's Reggie Awards. All of this is to say that I've come to appreciate being what Herman would call whole brain. And this is what I truly find to be most professionally fulfilling. Finding left brain solutions to right brain challenges and right brain solutions to left brain challenges. And while I can look back and realize this has always been the case for me, the ability to master both is what made me such a passionate, curious digital community manager 15 plus years ago. Well before there was social media, there were digital communities. And after there is social media, there will still be digital communities. Brands and marketers were among the first to recognize the potential of digital communities, which is what ultimately drove that early success of MySpace, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. As those platforms each evolved, or in the case of MySpace, devolved, the niche community opportunities somewhat subsided. But we're now in the midst of a niche digital community renaissance. I couldn't be more excited. From Reddit and subreddits to Discord, Slack, Goodreads for literary enthusiasts, Quora, House for DIY home decorating folks, and even Clubhouse. New forms of content and connection and collaboration are changing online conversations yet again. Digital marketing and media maven, I guess you could call him, Neil Patel, recently wrote about niche communities driving meaningful conversations again. He cited a study showing how a growing number of people are frustrated by bullying and offensive language on social media. These experiences lead people to pursue more comfortable environments and surroundings that speak more to their interests and personal experiences. Ultimately, the internet has become so diverse and disparate that there's something for everyone. Niche communities are more focused and allow you to connect with people with whom you're going to share common interests, no matter what they are in the world. And it's a much more personal experience. And these days, we could use a little bit more meaning and personal connection in our lives.